Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got a smorgasbord of strange and startling cryptid encounter stories to share with you. Right out of the gate, we have a possible Hellhound encounter, and then something the witness describes as a shapeshifter. And after that, we have a couple who observe a giant bronze humanoid walking across the roadway. And finally, did an avid outdoorsman really have an encounter with a gnome? To find out, you'll have to latch your saddlebags, grab your boots, and let's ride.
Number 1. Dear Biker, first off, I need to say that I've been protected by a guardian angel my whole life. There isn't much that can stand up to her. So I've always had a problem of no fear and have put myself in dangerous positions many times just knowing that I would be protected. First, I am a medium and have a few other paranormal gifts. When I'm around anything paranormal, I get a buzzing type feeling. Actually, two. One lets me know that it's a good entity, and the other that it's an evil entity. This happened back when I was 12, so I didn't know or understand that buzzing feeling then, so I don't remember that part of it, even if I recognized it. My best friend and I took turns sleeping over at each other's house. He lived in this small town, about 1,500 people. It was only 2 miles long and about 1.5 miles wide. We always slept out in his treehouse. That way, once his parents went to sleep, we could just sneak out and go roaming about the town. We did stupid stuff, like one Halloween we rolled the the building. Took right at a case of toilet paper, since we just wrapped the building, including the screen door. The whole building was 15 feet wide and 30 feet long, so it really wasn't that hard. Except I kind of felt sorry for the cop working inside at the time, when the other cop on duty showed up. Anyway, that's not the night that I'm talking about. The night in question, we had made it probably 4 miles from his home on the far right side of town. It got to be about 3 a.m. when there was a wreck or a shooting or something. The one town cop on duty showed up, and there were about 5 or 6 county deputies who showed up, plus the ambulance. So we decided it was time to get home. We walked just a little ways and then decided that if we cut through the cemetery, we could cut off almost half the distance. So we started across this cemetery. Just before the halfway point, we started to hear a growling. I recognized that growling, but that's another story for another day. The further we went, the louder it got. And then we could hear it coming from all different directions. We could hear twigs snapping around us the whole time, but we never could see anything. Finally, about 100 feet in, we both stopped and looked at each other. And then we both slowly looked behind us. There, floating in midair, were 2 red eyes. There was nothing visible, just those 2 large, red, menacing eyes. And somehow, I knew immediately that it was a hellhound. I just knew. During the whole encounter, they just floated between 3 to 5 feet off the ground, but at no time during the encounter did we ever see a body. Whatever it was just standing there, growling at us. We stared at those eyes until they bobbed. If it had a visible body, you would have seen the whole body flinch. That's when we turned and ran. We didn't have to tell each other to run, we both just ran for it. Right after we started running, I turned to look, and now there were 2 sets of eyes following us. We were running as fast as we could, and if you looked how the eyes were bounding, you could tell that these things had some extremely long legs. We ran close to 150 yards, and those things were just about to catch us. They should have caught up right after we started running. We finally made it to the 4-foot-high stone wall surrounding the cemetery. We managed to just jump over, and the exhaustion kicked in as we went across that wall. So we just stood there, bent over, trying to catch our breath. We watched the first one come flying across the wall. That's the only time we saw a body. only because it crossed the center line of that wall, and the body started glowing. Imagine something that looks like a pit bull crossed with a Rottweiler with the stance of I think it's called an English bulldog. And it was massive. It looked about 1.5 times the size of a St. Bernard. But the skin, it looked like black leather. But really couldn't tell since it was on fire inside and out. Right as it hit the ground, it just exploded. Needless to say, the second one stopped inside the cemetery, making a sound that was like a cross between a growl and a bark. There was something about the confines of that cemetery that allowed it to exist, but it couldn't exist outside. We just walked home in silence as we went to bed. We kind of discussed the events for about 5 minutes and never talked about it again. But I'm convinced that this was retaliation for the events that I alluded to earlier. We got ourselves into by accident and involved in a paranormal situation. Those two situations are what got me involved in paranormal work. These two events led to us ending our friendship. There was no fighting or anything. Things just got so awkward that we couldn't continue. I would be happy to tell the first story if anyone wants to hear it, but I'll warn you. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it. And my friend has convinced himself that it didn't happen. The same with this situation. He just doesn't want to believe it, and therefore, to him, it's not true. Most people don't believe me, but I know the truth, and I don't care what other people think. Signed, Bethany. Number 2. My fiance and I took a 3-day trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, spending our days in the mountains hiking and spending time in and around the national park there. On the last night, at around midnight, trying to get all the time in the mountains we could, we decided to take an hour's drive from our hotel room up into the mountain to get an overview lookout at a spot right on top of the said mountain to see if we could catch an awesome look at the stars, because there's a lot of lights in Gatlinburg at night. Driving up there, neither of us noticed literally anything off, other than the mountain winds are a little spooky at night. We're from Florida, so that's just unfamiliar. But as soon as we got to where we were going, she and I got out of my car, and I was almost overwhelmed with just this vile, oppressive feeling. Not wanting to make her uncomfortable, I tried not to react too much. The wind was absolutely roaring, and unfortunately, we couldn't see any stars due to cloud cover, so I told her that I was going to step to the side and take a leak, and then we could get back to the hotel room. As soon as I got like 10 feet away, I get this very strange feeling of extreme vulnerability and detachment from everything around me. Almost as though I'm miles away from the nearest person, though obviously I'm just feet away from my fiancé. I turned around to walk back to the car, and that's when I heard something off to my right. And I immediately looked over to see something, roughly human-sized, transform into a coyote, and then just kind of hop over the log from about 100 feet away. I quickly got back to the car, and my fiancée was looking at me strangely. I, still not trying to scare her, or at least show her that I was scared. But then she asked if I was all right, and apparently my reaction was a dead giveaway. We jumped in the car and sped off. Never in my life have I had an experience like this, and never in my life had I had a really good reason to be made uncomfortable for just being outside, but I truly believe that something unexplained was out in those woods with us that night. Thanks for reading this. Signed, Philip. Number 3. Dear Biker, my wife and I drove down a windy road at about 10 p.m. after dropping a friend off. We live in El Dorado County, California. It's a very wooded area, and properties are spread pretty far apart. By the way, this happened during the full moon in early February. It's very dark and secluded up there, but there was some moonlight. While approaching the sharpest turn in the road, I began slowing down to approach the almost 180-degree turn in the road. There were no homes around there, just a gated entrance to someone's unkept wooded property. I noticed, while talking with my wife, that something was moving across the road up ahead, where the turn was about to be made. My first thought was that it was just dust from a car that had maybe turned ahead of us, but that didn't make any sense because we were the only ones on the road up and again back down. What I saw was upwards of 20, maybe even 30 feet tall, a humanoid shape and very skinny. It had kind of a bronze luminescence of its very own. At first I thought it was dust in my headlights ahead, but the way it formed into this massively tall, slender being as it passed over the road. And as it got to the roadside and entered the tree line, heading up the mountainside, I realized a very large, skinny leg stepping forth from the shape and into the woods. It almost looked like a golden smoke, but it was certainly a shape and had real density to it. Needless to say, as soon as I realized that I was witnessing something very unnatural, I started to say, "Do you see that?" And that's when my wife cut me off to say, "You saw it too?" That's when all my hair stood up and I could feel the charge in the air of intense energy, even with the windows up and the heater on. I was suddenly terrified and just kept driving down the mountain because I knew we had both witnessed something that really shouldn't have existed. I pulled off the road about half a mile away to discuss specifically what we had just seen. Our descriptions matched to a T, and I had a very negative paranormal experience as a teenager, so when she enthusiastically demanded we go back, I was at first hesitant, but finally, curiosity got the best of me, and we returned to the place where we saw this thing. I'm still not sure if what we saw was a cryptid or an alien or some type of spirit, but I can say it was inhuman, and its sheer size was terrifying. I parked there on the side of the road with my headlights shining up the hillside in the direction that it was traveling, but we couldn't see anything. We stood there in the dark for about 15 minutes with the truck off, snapping photos and videos, but we captured nothing unusual. I'm very interested to hear what your theory is on what this could have possibly been. Thanks in advance, Biker. Signed, Pete. Number 4. Hey, Tattooed. I will be the first to admit that I thought these types of sightings were a joke and not real, and I've never been able to take them seriously. I am an outdoorsman and have been for the last 35 years. I grew up in the woods. I memorized trees from mushroom hunting for a living. I know every brook, stream, bush, berry grove, log, you name it. Because of this, I'd like to keep my location private. I'm on a forest road and not a soul in sight. I gather some mushrooms and look up the road and see a rock has fallen from the loose, steep side of the mountain down onto the middle of the road. I mentally note that I have to move it and not drive over it. I continue to gather my mushrooms and get back to the car. I look up and I see what appears to be a 2 to 2.5 foot tall little brown thing walking from the side of the road over to the rock. My first logical thought is that it's a squirrel, but I see that it's walking on 2 legs and appears to be wearing brown fur or fur clothes. And it's shaped like a human, but it's very tiny. It's not scurrying either, it's ambling on 2 legs, just like a small human would. Just casually walking like this is some normal, regular thing, like the monotonous work that it does for a living. Now, I don't believe my lying eyes. It just has to be something else. I get back in the car and I head up the road to see that the rock has been pushed back to the side of the road from where it came. It had fallen off the hill, rolled to my left, and then was sitting back on the other side of the road on the right. There were drag marks, like someone slid it back. I look, I smell, and I listen. Nothing. I don't know where gnomes live, but this old, partially logged, secluded area where I was looked pretty perfect for a clan of these things. Lots of places to hide, secluded, near water, plenty of routes for escape, and would be easy to dig little holes in the mountain and be fortified from invaders. The side road into it was flooded, and appears to do so pretty regularly, so these little guys would even have their own moat. I'm positive that I'm overthinking this. It was a long drive, back up the mountain, and then down the mountain the other way, and sometimes home, and I can't pick this apart into anything else but being a tiny little forest man. I'm like 1,000% positive of what I saw that day. The whole thing was near a military special interest zone, allegedly blocked off due to some native butterflies, but I'm starting to wonder if this research area is really about butterflies at all. After all, if they catch you there, they send you to prison, ban you from all parks, and give you a $5,000 fine if you even take a single berry from inside that boundary. I just wanted to share. Signed, Shane.
And there it is. All the bizarre and disturbing cryptid stories that I've got for you tonight. So what did you think about these? Me and the submitters are anxious to read your comments, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have a strange encounter or experience that you'd like to share, please, just send it to the email address in the description, and well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. And remember, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe. I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker.